I want to tell you about 7 things I've learned, usually the hard way, that we can cut back the amount of money we spend when we're cruising, leaving us to spend more on the things that really do matter. If you're new to my channel, welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge and I'm here to help make it easier to find, plan and have amazing cruise vacations. With that in mind, let's get going. The first mistake I learned was that not regularly checking cruise fares after booking could be costing all of us a sizable amount of cash. Now, since tracking fares, I've managed to get lots of benefits, like an upgrade from an entry-level suite on Cunard to one of the very glitzy penthouse suites, upgrades from Ocean View into premium balcony cabins on other lines, and I've quite frequently had my onboard credit boosted by quite a lot of money quite a few times. And that's simply by keeping an eye on fare changes for the cabin grade that I've booked. So if the line drops the fare for the cabin grade that I've booked, I get my agent, or when I used to book direct, get onto the cruise line myself. And I point out that we've seen that the grade is now being sold cheaper and basically ask them what they will do. And as a result, I've had those perks and benefits that I've mentioned. However, if you do actually contact them and they say we're not going to do anything and you have a refundable fare, then what you should do is actually cancel and rebook at the lower fare. You'll find if you say you're going to do that more than often, they will actually start offering those various upgrades or onboard credits. Now, the way that I track fares is first by signing up for the cruise line marketing emails. And if they start doing various deals that cover my booked cruise, I go in and check if they're now selling it much cheaper. But it's so much easier to use one of the websites that track all of this for you. Now, there are a couple of options, but the absolute best by far, in my view, and the one that I use, it's free and it's called cruisewatch.com. Now, you can sign up for a free account. You basically select your cruise, you set some parameters, so you can set the grade of cabin, you can even specify a very exact grade in most cases, and then basically you'll get email alerts when prices change. So you can then also track, of course, cruises you're interested in, and they'll let you know if prices are going up or prices going down, which could help you decide when to book. So not tracking your cruise fare is the one mistake that so many cruise passengers make, and you could save a lot of money. Now, my experience, almost every onboard activity that you have to pay for, so things like Wi-Fi, drinks packages, specialty dining, spa, and so on, it's generally cheaper if you buy it online in the Manage My Cruise before you go on board. Of course, the lines want to get us to lock these in and, of course, get us to pay for them up front. So I always check what promotions and offers they have versus the sort of regular onboard price that's listed. Now, the advantage is also that if you do that, you can lock in things like spa and dining. You can get the popular days, the popular times, because if you don't, they'll usually be gone by the time that you get on the ship. Now, again, of course, if I get on the ship and find that they're discounting even deeper than I paid online in advance, I simply go and ask what they will do. And I've found that they'll normally adjust in some way. So not checking and buying those add-ons before boarding is definitely another mistake I've learned to avoid. One area that lines do not often discount in advance are their excursions, though some will actually offer you packages. So if you book, say, a certain number of excursions, the price overall is lower, but it doesn't happen that often. So there are 2 big mistakes that I see cruisers make on excursions that do have a cost implication. First of all, if there are any that I really want to do, any excursions that I really want to do, I actually book them in advance, even if they're not cheaper, because often you might find by the time you get on board, they're sold out. Now, I've learned this, again, the hard way a few times. So although I may not save money directly, I won't be disappointed. So it's kind of good money spent, if you like. But much more important is I always compare cruise line excursions with alternatives. Now, these include private, independent, local tour guides, but the easiest to do is with one of the independent cruise excursion providers. Now, they almost always have the standard and the most popular cruise line excursions, but they often will have much more unusual ones, so that is great too. Really importantly, they'll always be cheaper and they have smaller group sizes than the cruise line ones. Now, the 2 that I look at are cruiseexcursions.com and Shore Excursions Group. So what you do is you input your cruise ship and dates. They basically show your itinerary and they'll show you port by port all of the tours. Importantly, they also have a guarantee that they'll get you back to the ship before the all aboard and departure time, and they guarantee they will cover getting you to rejoin the ship if they don't. Now, of course, you should double check that if you're using them when you actually book those. Now, bearing in mind that you can easily spend hundreds of dollars on excursions on a cruise, and up to thousands of dollars if you're going to Alaska, for example. So not checking alternatives could be a very costly mistake indeed. Now, one reminder that is one very costly mistake is if you miss the ship departing from a port. The line will only wait for their own excursions. So if you decide to save money by only self-touring, be really careful, really cautious about getting back in time, because that could cost you an enormous amount of money. Not researching and not planning excursions before a cruise, in my view, is a really big mistake. Especially if you don't do that, when you get on board, you're pretty much only option left for you is the cruise line excursion, which is pretty much going to be more expensive. Now, one easy mistake I often point out to people heading off on a cruise is that they're not taking the alcohol, the water, or the soda allowance on board, especially if they're not buying a drinks package. This is a silly mistake because every line allows you to bring a certain amount of drink onto the ship, normally around 2 bottles of wine, a certain amount of beer or sodas. So check what you can bring, as that of course is going to save you some money for sure, particularly if you're not going for the drinks package. So bring your allowances on board. It's a mistake not to. Falling into a habit of double tipping has cost me a small fortune over all the various cruises that I've done. Now, this is much more tricky than the other mistakes, and you really need to decide if this is a cost you want to have or not have, because there is actually in this one a case for doing both. Now, gratuities for the crew, as most lines call them, are usually set by the line at a rate per day. It's rounding about $15 or more per person per day. So that could end up being a couple of $100 on top of your cruise cost. Now, they usually give the option to either pay them before traveling with your final balance payment or to have them added to your account on board. So that's between $210 to $250 per couple per week at least. Now, of course, some lines will include them in the fare, so the ultra luxury lines do that, and also lines like Celebrity and P&O Cruises, so more and more lines are sort of bundling in the fare. However, I always feel pretty bad if I'm not actually handing over a gratuity at the end of the cruise. Now, this probably is partly because that's the way it was when I started cruising. The lines would leave envelopes, you'd put cash in, and you'd then hand those over to your steward, your cabin steward, and the waiting staff. The problem is I now have that guilt, so I end up double tipping. Now, just how much this mounts up to across all my cruises really came to sharp focus when we were on a 10 weeks segment of a world cruise, and I realized we had, through auto charge, paid a hefty sum of money, but we felt we had to pay pretty much the same amount again. So we're talking like $1,000 or so. Of course, great service and relationships may mean that you do want to double tip, but it could be costing you a fortune. So you need to decide what you feel most comfortable with and budget it if you do plan to double tip. Now, what do? Well, I tend to extra tip above the fixed charge, but it's certainly not double tipping. So it's more just a gesture, if you like. So really important, have a think about it. It's a mistake that you could be making and could cost you a lot of money over all your cruises. The next one is potentially the most costly mistake of all. Now, many of you will see this as a cost, but it could save you untold amounts of money, and this is having proper cruise travel insurance. Now, post the pandemic, not having it may actually not be an option anyway, because what I'm seeing many lines as then they return to service, they now require you to show it at boarding versus just declaring you had it in the online check-in process. You just had to say you had it before. Now they're checking. Importantly, those lines that are checking will deny boarding without having proper cruise insurance. They're asking for it to have 3 key elements. 1, be cruise specific, and that includes elements like emergency evacuation from the ship, repatriation, that kind of stuff. 2, it has to have certain minimum medical cover limits, around about $3 million as a minimum. And thirdly, and importantly, it has to cover COVID-related issue and illnesses. So not having it may cost you a lot if you're denied boarding and lost travel costs to get to the port, and based on refund policy or cruise costs. But much more important, much more significant, is if something goes wrong, you could be thousands and thousands and thousands out of pocket. So importantly, take it out when you book, and ensure that it has a cancel for any reason if you possibly can. Then if you cannot go, you don't lose your deposits if they are kind of non-refundable by the cruise line. But most importantly, if you fall ill or injure yourself and have to go into a hospital in a foreign port, in addition to the onboard medical costs, you'll have to cover all the local costs of medical treatment and then also getting yourself and your travel companions home. The lines will not assist financially in any way and probably not even logistically. So having that medical help from the insurance company is really important. Now, a couple who were travel bloggers that I knew, they were on a trip in South America. The husband slipped and really badly damaged his back on an excursion. He eventually had to be flown back to the United States on a private medical flight evacuation. Their costs would have been over $150,000, but it was all covered because they had insurance. Now, another traveler was on part of the Cunard World Cruise we did in 2016. He was hit by a car crossing the road outside the port in Honolulu, Hawaii. He broke his leg pretty badly, so he had to go to the hospital. He and his travel companion were disembarked, and he had to stay there, sort out all the medical treatment, get his leg fixed. And once it was okay to travel again, he had to get back to the UK once he was able to do that travel. Enormous costs were involved, but they were insured, so they didn't have to worry. Of course, none of us plan to get ill. None of us plan to injure ourselves on a trip, but it happens. So the cost of that travel insurance is really, really important. It's an easy thing to do. It could save you vast life-changing amounts. So don't make the mistake of not having proper cruise travel insurance. Now, one simple and really silly mistake I made cost me just over $200 a couple of cruises back, showing how you need to keep ahead and on the ball with all of these mistakes because it is easy to slip up. What was it? Well, it was not sticking to my habit of putting my phone into airplane mode as I boarded the ship. Really, really important to get into that habit. If you're not in airplane mode, when sailing, your phone will connect to the ship's satellite phone services like Telenor, Maritime and Cellular at Sea, which is a pretty common one. They will cost you around $2.70 per minute to send and receive calls, and much, much more for data. Now, when you're in port, your phone will then connect to a local provider, but again, depending on the roaming deals that your provider has, the charges in port could be as high as that as well. I forgot to put my phone into airplane mode on a Caribbean cruise, and my phone was using the cruise satellite to update apps and run email in the background. Now, I only realized it after a day or two at sea when we came into port, and the local provider sent a text message saying I was now connected to their service. By then, I had run up a $200 bill on my phone for absolutely no benefit. So what do I do to stay in touch instead? Many people ask me this. Well, many ships have incredible Wi-Fi. It's getting better and better and better. It's been bundled into the fare, or it's now becoming at more reasonable rates. So I always get a package where I can stay connected all the time, and then I use my phone in airplane mode to do iMessage or WhatsApp or do FaceTime calls to home. It really is that good. And then it means that I'm controlling the costs and I don't have those crazy roaming costs. If you want more tips on saving money cruising, I've put together a short playlist of 2 videos that I think will help. So click and watch these right now.